What happens when one of Hollywood's most spiritually grounded actors faces the ultimate test of faith on live television? The moment that unfolded on Good Morning America yesterday morning will be remembered as the day a host crossed a line that should never be crossed, and witnessed a response so profound it left an entire studio speechless. Keanu Reeves, beloved for his wisdom, humility, and deep spiritual journey, found himself under attack in the most personal way imaginable when George Stephanopoulos made a decision that would shock millions of viewers worldwide. This wasn't just an interview gone wrong. This was a deliberate assault on the very beliefs that have guided Keanu through life's darkest moments, the same spiritual foundation that helped him overcome unimaginable personal losses and emerge as one of the most respected souls in Hollywood. But what George didn't expect was that behind Keanu's gentle demeanor lies a man whose faith runs deeper than the ocean, whose spiritual convictions are unshakable, and whose response to mockery would teach the world a lesson about dignity, respect, and the true power of belief. The confrontation began innocently enough, with what seemed like casual curiosity about Keanu's well-known spiritual practices. George had done his research, knew about Keanu's meditation habits, his philosophical outlook, his quiet acts of charity that stem from deep spiritual conviction. What started as seemingly respectful questions about his faith journey quickly transformed into something much darker, something that crossed every boundary of human decency. The attack wasn't just on Keanu's beliefs, it was on the very idea that spirituality has any place in the modern world, that faith is anything more than wishful thinking for the weak-minded. George's questions became increasingly aggressive, his tone more condescending with each passing moment, as he systematically attempted to dismantle not just Keanu's personal beliefs, but the foundation of hope that millions of viewers share. The studio crew watched in horror as their beloved guest, known for bringing light and positivity to every room he enters, was subjected to a level of disrespect that no human being should ever endure. Before we dive into this incredible story that will restore your faith in standing up for what you believe in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about someone attacking another person's deepest spiritual convictions on national television. Because what happened next proved that some things are sacred, some lines should never be crossed, and when they are, the response can be more powerful than any storm. But nothing could have prepared George Stephanopoulos for what Keanu Reeves was about to unleash. A response so spiritually powerful, so filled with quiet strength, that it would leave the entire studio questioning everything they thought they knew about faith, respect, and the true meaning of grace under fire. The morning began like countless other promotional appearances that have made Keanu Reeves one of the most welcomed guests on television. He arrived at the Good Morning America studios carrying more than just his usual understated elegance. He brought with him the quiet confidence of a man who had found peace through decades of spiritual seeking. Dressed in his signature simple black attire, Keanu moved through the bustling studio with that characteristic presence that crew members always noticed, taking time to greet everyone from the camera operators to the makeup artists, asking genuine questions about their families and remembering details from previous visits that most celebrities would never bother to retain. This wasn't just politeness. This was the manifestation of a spiritual practice that had transformed a Hollywood star into something much rarer, a genuinely caring human being. The film he was there to promote held special significance in his personal journey, a project about finding meaning in life's struggles and discovering the divine spark that exists within every human soul. It was a story born from his own experiences with loss, grief, and the spiritual awakening that had carried him through Hollywood's darkest temptations and emerged stronger on the other side. George Stephanopoulos had prepared for this interview differently than usual. Research notes spread across his desk revealed not just talking points about the film, but detailed information about Keanu's spiritual practices, his meditation routines, his quiet charitable work that stemmed from deep religious conviction, and most disturbingly, what appeared to be a strategy to question the authenticity of it all. The host had decided that America's favorite actor had been getting away with something for too long, this image of spiritual wisdom and genuine kindness that seemed too good to be true in an industry known for its darkness. As the cameras prepared to roll, there was an unusual tension in the air that the technical crew couldn't quite identify. George's demeanor was different, sharper somehow, while Keanu sat with that familiar peaceful composure, completely unaware that he was about to face the most challenging test of his spiritual convictions that had ever been broadcast to millions. The conversation was supposed to focus on his latest film, on the themes of redemption and hope that had drawn him to the project, on the incredible cast and crew who had helped bring this vision to life. Instead, what viewers were about to witness was something far more personal, far more revealing, and infinitely more powerful than any movie promotion could ever be. George had made a decision that would expose not just his own character, but would call forth from Keanu Reeves a depth of spiritual strength that would leave everyone questioning what they truly believed about faith, respect, and the courage it takes to defend the sacred in a world that increasingly mocks everything holy. But as the red recording light flickered on and George Stephanopoulos opened his mouth to speak, no one in that studio could have imagined that they were about to witness a spiritual battle that would redefine what it means to stand up for your deepest beliefs when the whole world is watching. The moment those cameras began rolling, George Stephanopoulos revealed his true intentions with a question that caught everyone off guard. "Keanu, let's talk about something our viewers are genuinely curious about," George began, his tone carrying an edge that immediately shifted the atmosphere in the studio. "You've built quite a reputation around this whole spiritual guru persona, this meditation and mindfulness thing. But isn't it interesting how convenient it is that your spiritual awakening happened to coincide perfectly with your career renaissance? Almost like it's been carefully crafted for public consumption." The question hung in the air like a challenge, designed not to explore but to undermine. Keanu's expression remained calm, but those who knew him well could see the slight pause, the moment of recognition that this wasn't going to be the respectful conversation he had prepared for. "George, I appreciate the opportunity to be here," Keanu responded with his characteristic thoughtfulness. "But I think there might be some misunderstanding about what spirituality means to me. It's not a persona or a career strategy, it's how I've learned to navigate life's deepest challenges and find meaning in both joy and suffering." But George wasn't interested in understanding. If anything, Keanu's sincere response seemed to embolden him further. "That's exactly what I'm talking about," the host pressed, leaning forward with what could only be described as predatory interest. This constant deflection into philosophical language, these carefully rehearsed responses about finding meaning. Don't you think the American public deserves to see past this spiritual smokescreen? To understand that maybe, just maybe, all this meditation and charity work is really just an elaborate marketing campaign? The accusation was sharp and deeply personal, striking at the very heart of what Keanu held most sacred. Around the studio, crew members began exchanging uncomfortable glances, sensing that something had gone terribly wrong with what should have been a routine promotional interview. The host's aggressive tone was becoming impossible to ignore, and even seasoned television professionals were beginning to feel the tension building to dangerous levels. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his voice remaining steady but carrying a new firmness that hadn't been there moments before. "George, I'm not deflecting anything. What you're calling a smokescreen has been my anchor through losing my best friend, through personal tragedies that nearly broke me, through moments when I questioned everything about existence itself. My spiritual practice isn't marketing. It's what kept me alive when death seemed like the easier option." The raw honesty in Keanu's voice should have been enough to make any decent interviewer pause, to recognize that they had ventured into territory too sacred for public consumption. But George Stephanopoulos had clearly decided that vulnerability was weakness, that authenticity was performance, and that faith itself was fair game for his particular brand of aggressive journalism. What happened next would prove that when you attack a man's deepest beliefs, you better be prepared for the spiritual storm that follows. Because Keanu Reeves was about to reveal just how powerful faith can be when it's tested by fire on live television. George's eyes gleamed with what could only be described as calculated malice as he prepared to launch his most devastating attack yet. "Let's get specific about these spiritual practices you claim have transformed your life," he said, his voice dripping with condescension that made several crew members visibly uncomfortable. "You sit in silence for hours, talking to what exactly? You give away millions to charity while claiming it's some kind of divine calling. You speak about meditation and mindfulness like they're actual solutions to real problems. Isn't all of this just sophisticated self-deception for someone who can't handle the reality that life is random, meaningless, and ultimately empty?" The question wasn't just an attack on Keanu's beliefs, it was an assault on the very concept of faith itself, delivered with the kind of intellectual arrogance that seeks to destroy hope in the name of enlightenment. The studio had fallen completely silent now, with even the background technical noise seeming to quiet as everyone processed the sheer audacity of what they had just witnessed. George had crossed a line that most civilized people recognize as sacred, regardless of their own beliefs. Keanu's breathing became more measured, a sign that he was drawing on every spiritual discipline he had ever learned to maintain his composure in the face of such deliberate cruelty. "George, what you're describing as self-deception has given me the strength to help others find their way through darkness," he replied, his voice steady but carrying an undertone of steel. "When I meditate, I'm not talking to some imaginary figure. I'm connecting with something larger than myself, something that calls me to be better than my worst impulses, something that reminds me that love is always stronger than hatred." But George pressed on with the relentless determination of someone who had mistaken cynicism for wisdom. "Come on, Keanu. You're an intelligent man. Surely you can see how all of this sounds to rational people? This talk of connecting with something larger, of love conquering hatred, these are beautiful platitudes, but they're not reality. Reality is what happened to your friend River Phoenix. Reality is the tragedies you faced. Where was this something larger when you actually needed it?" The mention of River Phoenix was like a physical blow, a deliberate strike at the most painful wound in Keanu's life, designed to shatter his spiritual convictions by forcing him to confront the apparent absence of divine intervention in his darkest moments. Around the studio, several people gasped audibly at the sheer cruelty of using a man's deepest grief as ammunition in what had become a war against faith itself. For a moment, Keanu sat in complete silence, not from uncertainty, but from the profound sadness of watching another human being reveal such darkness in their soul. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to fill the entire studio. "George, you just proved everything that's wrong with the way some people approach spirituality and faith. You think that because terrible things happen, because we lose people we love, because life includes suffering, that somehow negates the reality of divine love and spiritual truth." But what George Stephanopoulos didn't understand was that he had just awakened something in Keanu Reeves that rarely surfaces: the spiritual warrior who emerges when sacred ground is violated, and the response that was coming would shake the very foundations of everyone watching. What happened next transformed the entire atmosphere of that studio as Keanu Reeves revealed a side of himself that few had ever witnessed. Not anger, not defensiveness, but the quiet, unshakable power of a man whose faith had been forged in the fires of real suffering and emerged stronger than steel. His posture straightened, his gaze became laser-focused, and when he spoke, his voice carried an authority that seemed to command the attention of every soul in that room. "George, let me tell you what spirituality actually is," Keanu began, his words measured but flowing with undeniable conviction. "It's not the absence of pain, it's finding meaning within the pain. It's not pretending that tragedy doesn't exist, it's discovering that love persists even in the face of tragedy. When River died, when I've faced losses that brought me to my knees, my faith didn't promise me that suffering would end. It promised me that suffering could be transformed into something that serves others." The transformation in Keanu's demeanor was subtle but unmistakable, like watching a mountain reveal its true height as the clouds cleared away. This wasn't the gentle, soft-spoken actor that everyone knew. This was a man whose spiritual convictions ran so deep that attacking them had awakened something profound and unshakable. "You want to know where that something larger was during my darkest moments?" Keanu continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "It was in the strangers who reached out with compassion. It was in the opportunity to turn my pain into purpose. It was in the realization that every act of kindness, every moment of genuine connection, every choice to love instead of hate is a miracle that happens 1,000,000 times every day. You're sitting there looking for God in the big dramatic interventions, but you're missing the divine in every breath, every heartbeat, every chance we get to choose light over darkness." George tried to interject, his earlier confidence now visibly shaken by the depth and authenticity of what he was witnessing. "But Keanu, surely you can understand why people might be skeptical?" he began, But the actor continued as if he hadn't spoken, his words flowing like a river that had finally found its course. "And here's what's truly heartbreaking about this moment, George," Keanu said, his voice now carrying a note of profound sadness mixed with unwavering strength. "You've spent the last 15 minutes trying to convince me and everyone watching that hope is foolish, that faith is weakness, that love is just chemical reactions and charity is just ego. But even as you've attacked everything I hold sacred, I can see the pain behind your cynicism. I can see a human being who's been hurt so deeply that destroying others' faith feels like the only way to justify your own emptiness." The studio had become so quiet you could hear individual heartbeats, as everyone present realized they were witnessing something extraordinary, not just a defense of faith, but a demonstration of it in action, as Keanu responded to cruelty with compassion, to mockery with understanding, to hatred with love so genuine it was impossible to deny. But the most powerful moment was yet to come, as Keanu Reeves prepared to deliver words that would not only silence his attacker but would remind everyone watching what it truly means to live with unshakable faith in a world that desperately needs to remember the power of the sacred. What Keanu Reeves said next will be remembered as one of the most spiritually powerful moments ever captured on live television, words that seemed to flow from a source far deeper than mere human wisdom. He stood up slowly, not in anger or defeat, but with the dignified grace of someone who had found his voice in defense of something eternal and sacred. "George, I want everyone watching to understand something profound that you've helped me demonstrate today," Keanu began, his voice now carrying a resonance that seemed to fill not just the studio but reach through the cameras into the hearts of millions watching at home. "True faith isn't proven by the absence of challenges to it, it's revealed by how we respond when our deepest beliefs are under attack. You've just given me the greatest gift possible, the opportunity to show the world that spiritual strength isn't about never being tested, it's about remaining loving even when faced with hatred." The words seemed to hang in the air like music, each syllable carrying weight that everyone in that room could feel. Camera operators found themselves leaning in, sound technicians forgot their equipment, and even the most cynical crew members felt something stirring in their hearts as they witnessed authentic spiritual power in action. "For the past 20 minutes, you've tried to convince everyone that my faith is fake, that my kindness is calculated, that my spiritual journey is just sophisticated marketing," Keanu continued, his gaze now encompassing not just George but speaking directly to every person who would ever see this moment. "But here's what you've actually accomplished. You've shown millions of people exactly why the world needs more faith, not less. You've demonstrated why we need more love, not more cynicism. You've proven why spiritual strength matters, because without it, we become exactly what you've shown us today." George sat frozen in his chair, his earlier smugness completely evaporated, replaced by something that looked like the dawning recognition of what he had become in this moment. Around him, the studio crew watched in absolute silence as they witnessed not just a defense of faith, but its living demonstration. "The saddest part of this entire encounter," Keanu said, his voice now filled with such genuine compassion that it was impossible to mistake for anything other than authentic love, "is that your attack on my beliefs has revealed the emptiness of your own. You've mistaken cruelty for intelligence, cynicism for wisdom, and destruction for strength. But even now, even after everything you've said, I want you to know that you're loved, that you have value, and that it's never too late to choose hope over despair." The transformation in the studio was palpable, as if the very air had changed from toxic to healing, from darkness to light. What had begun as an attack on one man's faith had become a masterclass in spiritual resilience, a demonstration of how genuine belief responds to persecution, not with equal cruelty, but with love so powerful it exposes hatred for the weakness it truly is. But the final words Keanu spoke before walking away would echo through the hearts of everyone who heard them, proving once and for all that when faith is real, when love is genuine, when spiritual conviction runs deeper than ego, nothing in this world can shake it, and the response to mockery becomes the most powerful sermon ever preached. What Keanu Reeves said in those final moments before walking away became the most quoted spiritual message of the decade, words that would be shared millions of times across social media, printed on inspirational posters, and remembered by everyone who witnessed this extraordinary display of grace under fire. He removed his microphone slowly, each movement deliberate and peaceful, as he prepared to deliver the message that would transform this moment from a celebrity interview into a spiritual awakening for millions. "George, and to everyone watching at home," Keanu said, his voice now carrying the quiet authority of someone who had found unshakable truth, "I want to leave you with something that I hope will outlast this conversation and touch your hearts long after these cameras stop rolling. What you've witnessed today isn't really about me defending my faith. It's about demonstrating that real spiritual strength doesn't fight darkness with more darkness. It transforms darkness into light." The silence in that studio was profound, the kind of quiet that comes when people recognize they are witnessing something sacred, something that transcends the ordinary boundaries of television entertainment and touches the eternal. Even the most hardened crew members found themselves hanging on every word, sensing that they were part of something that would be remembered long after their careers were over. Every single person watching this has faced moments when their deepest beliefs were attacked, when their hope was mocked, when their faith was questioned, Keanu continued, now speaking directly to the millions of viewers who had found themselves unexpectedly moved by what they were witnessing. And in those moments, you have a choice. You can respond with the same cruelty that was shown to you, or you can choose to be living proof that love is stronger than hatred, that faith is more powerful than cynicism, and that one person choosing light can illuminate even the darkest room. George Stephanopoulos sat motionless, no longer the confident aggressor but a man who had been confronted with his own spiritual poverty in the most public way possible. The cameras captured every nuance of his expression as the full weight of what he had attempted to destroy settled over him like a revelation of his own emptiness. "The greatest tragedy of today wasn't that my faith was attacked," Keanu said, picking up his jacket with the same calm dignity he had shown throughout this extraordinary ordeal. "The greatest tragedy is that millions of people just watched someone try to destroy hope itself, and they saw how hollow and desperate that attempt really was. But they also saw something else. They saw that hope cannot be destroyed, that faith cannot be mocked out of existence, and that love always, always wins in the end." As Keanu walked toward the studio exit, his final words echoed through the space with the power of truth that could not be denied, could not be argued with, and could not be forgotten. "I forgive you, George. I forgive you for the attack, for the cruelty, for the attempt to steal hope from people who desperately need it. And I pray that someday you'll understand that the very faith you tried to destroy today is the same faith that allows me to walk away from this moment still believing in your capacity for redemption." The studio door closed behind him with a soft click that seemed to echo through the hearts of everyone who had witnessed this remarkable demonstration of spiritual strength, leaving behind a host who looked smaller somehow, a crew that had been profoundly moved, and millions of viewers who had just learned what real faith looks like when it's tested by fire. What happened in that studio proved something that the world desperately needed to remember. When someone tries to mock the sacred, they don't diminish its power, they reveal their own desperate need for exactly what they're trying to destroy, and sometimes, just sometimes, love responds in a way so powerful that it changes everyone who witnesses it forever. What did you think of Keanu's incredible response to this spiritual attack? Have you ever had to defend your deepest beliefs against mockery? Let me know in the comments below what this moment meant to you, and make sure to subscribe because stories like this remind us all why faith, hope, and love will always triumph over cynicism and hatred. The way Keanu handled this situation shows us something profound about the true power of spiritual conviction when it's tested by the world's darkest impulses. The minutes that followed Keanu Reeves' departure from that Good Morning America studio became the stuff of television legend, as what had just transpired slowly sank into the consciousness of everyone who had witnessed it. George Stephanopoulos sat in his chair, staring at the spot where one of Hollywood's most beloved figures had just delivered the most powerful spiritual message ever broadcast on morning television. The host's face had transformed from smug confidence to something resembling genuine shock, as if he was only now beginning to understand the magnitude of what he had attempted to destroy and what had been revealed instead. Camera operators who had filmed thousands of interviews found themselves wiping away tears they couldn't explain, sound technicians discovered their hands were shaking as they processed audio that had carried more emotional weight than anything they had ever recorded, and production assistants stood frozen in place, knowing they had just witnessed something that transcended ordinary television and touched the realm of the sacred. The studio, which moments before had been filled with toxic energy and spiritual warfare, now felt different, purified somehow, as if Keanu's words had literally changed the molecular structure of the air itself. Within hours, clips of the confrontation began spreading across social media with a velocity that stunned even seasoned digital marketers. But this wasn't the usual viral content that flames bright and burns out quickly. This was something deeper, more profound, touching hearts and minds in ways that entertainment rarely achieves. Comments sections that usually devolved into arguments became spaces of genuine reflection, as people from every faith tradition and none at all found themselves moved by what they had witnessed. "I'm not even religious, but watching Keanu defend his faith made me want to believe in something beautiful again," wrote one viewer whose comment received hundreds of thousands of likes. "I've been mocked for my beliefs my whole life, but seeing how he responded with love instead of anger just changed something in my heart forever," shared another, whose words were shared and reshared until they reached millions of people hungry for exactly this kind of hope. Religious leaders from every tradition began reaching out, not to claim Keanu as one of their own, but to acknowledge that what he had demonstrated transcended denominational boundaries and touched something universal about the human spirit's relationship with the divine. Pastors, rabbis, imams, and spiritual teachers found themselves using his response as an example of how faith should manifest in the face of persecution, not with defensiveness or aggression, but with love so genuine it transforms both the believer and those who witness that belief in action. The most remarkable part of the aftermath wasn't the praise Keanu received, but what happened to the people who watched it. Suicide hotlines reported a decrease in calls that week. Marriage counselors saw couples inspired to choose love over resentment, and churches, temples, and spiritual centers across the country experienced an influx of people searching for the kind of unshakable peace they had witnessed in those extraordinary moments. But perhaps the most profound impact was on George Stephanopoulos himself, whose life was about to change in ways that would prove Keanu's final words about redemption weren't just beautiful rhetoric, they were prophetic truth that would unfold in the most unexpected and powerful way imaginable. What happened to George Stephanopoulos in the days following that confrontation became one of the most remarkable spiritual transformation stories in modern media history. The man who had attempted to mock and destroy faith on live television found himself experiencing something he had never expected, a profound spiritual awakening that began the very moment Keanu Reeves walked out of that studio, leaving behind words of forgiveness that echoed in George's mind like a revelation he couldn't escape. The first sign that something had fundamentally shifted came just hours after the interview aired, when George found himself alone in his dressing room, staring at his reflection and seeing a stranger looking back. The confident, aggressive journalist who had built a career on tough questions and intellectual superiority was gone, replaced by someone who looked haunted by the realization of what he had become. For the first time in decades, George Stephanopoulos was forced to confront the emptiness that had driven him to attack another human being's most sacred beliefs on national television. "I couldn't sleep for 3 days," George would later reveal in an interview that shocked the media world. "Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Keanu's voice saying he forgave me, that he still believed in my capacity for redemption. I had spent my entire career thinking that faith was weakness, that spirituality was just sophisticated self-deception. But in that moment, when he responded to my cruelty with genuine love, I realized that I was the one who was deceiving himself." The transformation wasn't immediate or easy. George spent weeks wrestling with questions he had never allowed himself to ask, confronting the pain and cynicism that had driven him to become someone who found satisfaction in tearing down what others held sacred. He began reading spiritual texts, not to mock them as he had done in the past, but to understand what Keanu had been trying to share with the world. He reached out to religious leaders, spiritual teachers, and philosophers, searching for answers to questions that his intellectual arrogance had never permitted him to explore. The most profound moment came 3 weeks after the interview, when George made a decision that stunned his colleagues and changed his life forever. He picked up the phone and called Keanu Reeves directly, not as a journalist seeking a story, but as a broken human being seeking forgiveness and guidance from someone who had demonstrated what real faith looked like under fire. Keanu answered the phone like he had been expecting my call. George revealed months later, his voice carrying an emotion that no one who knew him had ever heard before. The first thing he said wasn't, "I told you so," or anything that would make me feel worse about what I had done. He simply said, "George, I've been praying for you, and I'm so glad you called." In that moment, I understood that everything he had said about love being stronger than hatred wasn't just philosophy, it was his lived reality. The conversation that followed lasted 3 hours and became the foundation for a friendship that no one could have predicted. Keanu didn't lecture George about spirituality or try to convert him to any particular faith tradition. Instead, he simply listened with the kind of compassionate attention that George had never experienced, asking questions that helped the former skeptic discover his own path toward meaning and purpose. But the most remarkable part of George's transformation was still to come, as he made a decision that would prove to the world that authentic spiritual encounters don't just change individuals, they create ripple effects that touch countless lives in ways that can only be described as miraculous. 2 months after that life-changing confrontation, George Stephanopoulos did something that shocked the entire media world. He returned to Good Morning America and delivered a public apology that became the most watched segment in the show's history. With tears in his eyes and a humility that no one had ever seen from him before, George looked directly into the camera and spoke words that would be remembered forever. "I need to apologize not just to Keanu Reeves, but to every person of faith whose beliefs I have mocked throughout my career," George said, his voice breaking with genuine emotion. "What I did that day wasn't journalism, it was cruelty disguised as intellectualism. And what Keanu showed me through his response wasn't just grace under pressure, it was the living demonstration of everything I thought was fake but desperately needed to be real." The segment went viral within hours, but more importantly, it sparked a movement of people sharing their own stories of how Keanu's response had changed their lives. Cancer patients wrote about finding new strength in their faith, divorced couples reconciled after choosing forgiveness over bitterness, and thousands of young people discovered that believing in something greater than themselves wasn't weakness, it was the source of unshakable strength. The most powerful moment came when George revealed that he and Keanu had become close friends, meeting regularly for what George called conversations that saved my soul. The former skeptic had found faith not through argument or debate, but through witnessing love in action when hatred seemed easier. "Keanu taught me that real faith isn't about having all the answers," George concluded. "It's about choosing love when the world gives you every reason to choose hatred. It's about responding to cruelty with compassion, to mockery with grace, and to attack with forgiveness. That's not weakness, that's the most powerful force in the universe." This incredible story proves that no one is beyond redemption, that love really can conquer hatred, and that sometimes the most profound spiritual victories happen not in churches or temples, but on live television when someone chooses faith over fear. What did this story mean to you? Have you ever witnessed love transform hatred right before your eyes? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more incredible stories that remind us why hope will always triumph over cynicism.